So welcome everybody to the People Prescription. Today we've got Steve Dufresne from Logic Resourcing with us, and we're going to be exploring everything around recruitment today, folks. Why recruitment deserves a full hour. We're going to be touching on things like Steve's background in over a decade of recruitment and people ops, what great recruitment looks like, the real costs as well of getting it wrong, looking at potentially ghosting situations from both directions. Also, perhaps considering why Indeed and jobs boards can be challenging for owner-led businesses, and onboarding as part of recruitment, not after it. Again, we've got a lot of really helpful material on that today, folks. And we're going to do a bit of quick fire myth busting as well, which I'm sure you'll find useful. Great to have you with us, Steve, and look forward to getting into today's podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Quick question for you, Steve. How did you get involved in Logic Resourcing? Ultimately, who do you help and how do you help them?
Yeah, probably like everybody gets into recruitment a little bit by accident, to be fair, Rich.
Right.
So my first kind of 6 years of my kind of working life was spent working for Phones for You, and I was their internal recruitment manager at there. So we'd be recruiting everything from the store staff when I initially went in, then moving across to looking after the recruitment for our head office and contact centre functions, as well as the retail field sales management as well. So it was never a purposeful move in kind of career, but I really enjoyed the people-focused side of recruitment. I then went across to be a HR business partner for 5 years at Logic Resourcing. And then I think I just had a bad day where I had to go make a load of people redundant. Unfortunately, Lee had been on about for years, who's my kind of co-director, about setting up a recruitment agency. He caught me on a good day. I said yes, and then the rest is history. And we've kind of been going for about 9 years now.
Fantastic. So nearly a decade in recruitment, and I'm keen to get your observations about like how the climate is at the moment, how businesses are responding to hiring generally, if things have changed. We speak a bit about AI, and we've previously spoke before about some of the stories where perhaps AI doesn't always get it right, and that would be useful to share some of the lesser known potential challenges that businesses face when they're using AI in the company for recruitment. When people think recruitment, when I speak to business owners, especially like in the small, modest enterprise space, they genuinely think initially, oh, it's about posting a job and picking a CV. And what would you say they're missing from that? Because there's so much to it, isn't there? There's so many layers to recruitment.
I think everybody thinks they can recruit, whether you're a technical specialist within your departmental function, whether you're an MD. Everybody thinks they're a great recruiter, and because it's almost not seen as a skill set. It's almost seen as a function or a functional part of a job.
Right.
Whereas, of all the kind of years and the kind of 20 plus years within HR and recruitment that I've done, recruitment 100% is a skill set. The ability to ask the right questions at the right time, the ability to be able to understand people's trajectory, motives, motivations, and all the other kind of stuff, ultimately is the skill. And not everybody is skilled in getting those details out of an employee or a potential new employee. So I think it's not always treated with the level of time needed, and time's a huge bit. Again, when you are a functional manager and you're recruiting, you're doing your day job, but ultimately having to put a little bit of time aside for recruitment. And good recruitment takes time, ultimately, to be able to find people, contact people, to go through the right process. Ultimately, I think time is the biggest thing needed within any process.
Absolutely. And it seems to me like, again, when you're speaking to a lot of owner-led businesses, time's the most precious resource they have, then energy as well, where their energy can go on a daily basis. And I genuinely think that there perhaps is an assumption there that it won't take as long to fill a particular role on, the climate we're in currently. We're doing this podcast in June 26. And it's an incredibly tough market out there at the moment if you're trying to find great people. So to have somebody that you can lean into that understands the climate, that understands the industry sectors that they're working in, that can be the difference between getting recruitment right. And ultimately, where we don't talk too heavily around is the cost of getting it wrong. And the cost's huge. It's not only cost of the salary if that person's not perhaps the best fitting person for the role. It's also the time it takes to find them, the time it takes to to make sure the salary that's being offered as well is a competitive salary. That's something where I've heard business owners in the past say to me that they never realized how long, or there was perhaps it's always going to take longer than you think it's going to take, and it's also going to cost a bit more than you think it's going to cost. But from my view,
changed, Rich. It really has. Probably in the probably 8 years or so that we've done it, and I mean, it's probably tangible changes. The kind of market was mostly application driven and application led. So you had lots of major job boards, Monster, Total Jobs, Indeed, CV Library, Reed, JobSite. You had a massive, major national job boards. Now,
right.
You could argue that now those job boards are now filtering down to only 1, 2 or 3 channels, and actually application volume. You would come in the morning to a volume of applications, and maybe the recruiter's job at that point was sifting, finding the best talent within that, which again takes quite a lot of time. Whereas at this point we are now, actually application volumes, you may only get a couple of people apply, 2 or 3 overnight, right. And actually most of the better recruitment is now down to proactive searching and kind of sourcing. So there's always people on the market, and I think this always goes back to the business's need. There's 2 types of way that you recruit. You've got a desperate need that you need to fill in a skill set that you need to add immediate value. And with that, it's not always possible to get that through a job board, just through advertising, because actually you're requiring a little bit of luck. That person is available at that point in time to be able to do it. Whereas if you've got the ability to take somebody on to train them, and again, this is another thing we're seeing with businesses. A lot of businesses think we can get a junior in, but they can't actually put any time aside to be able to coach, support and develop these individuals for them then to fail. And then they come back and say, I just need somebody to hit the ground running. So I think it all depends on the need really in the end to whether the job board can be effective, and they can, but sometimes it's the same people on the market on the job boards. Actually, is the talent that you're really wanting to unearth, those ones that you need to go and get and have the conversations with that are going to add value in your industry immediately.
I'm with you. What I'm hearing there, as you're sharing it, is that a lot of what you do is, from a recruitment perspective, it's really key to focus on the preparation and not necessarily the action bit. If you get the prep right, then the action bit can look after itself. And we share a similar approach with the people ops. Yeah. Great people ops is about that 90% preparation and 10% action.
Yeah.
And think of it as almost kind of laying foundations for achieving the right environment or creating the right environment for a new start. And what would you say is the one belief that a lot of business leaders have around hiring that you perhaps want them to explore, perhaps dropping that belief? Do you have anything that pops up regularly where you're getting feedback from either a candidate or even, from the business leader themselves, where they're saying, I didn't realize that. And that this,
I just don't think sometimes they understand the market. And again, this is probably the value to using a supplier or an external recruiter, because they should understand the market in the area that you're operating in to be able to advise you in the right way. Quite often we see business owners go out at a specific salary that the person that's been in post has been on for the last 10 years. And the ability to be able to go to recruit the same level of candidate to that salary can, be quite challenging. I think one thing is quite often people go out without understanding what they're trying to do, what they're trying to attract, who they wish to get coming into the door. They push something out as a catch-all, let's see what we kind of get. But you're ultimately not talking to anybody then. Actually, the person trying to identify through your advertising material whether it's going to be the right opportunity for them or not is not actually kind of getting kind of captured. So I know I've probably put quite a couple of different things in there, but I think probably the overriding thing is really understanding who you are, your proposition, where your either company and role sits in the market, because that way it'll give you the best opportunity then to kind of build forward.
So in the same way that they'd acquire essentially customers, so looking at their offer first, very much a case of doing that with your internal customers, your stakeholders, your prospective employees, and figure out, okay, what does the offer look like so you can attract the best talent essentially.
And that goes down to retention as well, Rich. So ultimately, again, we did an exercise for one of our previous clients who asked us, can you jump on a call? I want to talk you through my current guys, what they're currently being paid. He really wanted to understand where they sat in his structure,
right?
Because ultimately that helps him retain.
Absolutely.
It's less likely that somebody's going to be able to pull that person out of the job if they are already competitively paid and it's a good working environment. Whereas if the person's 10k below salary and they're kind of getting hit up by a recruiter, then there's a good chance that they may listen at some point, and at a point probably where they've got some frustration in the business. So yeah, I think, it doesn't only lend to your attraction strategy. Having a really great understanding of your benchmarking, your people, where they sit, really helps attract and retain in the end.
Yeah, exactly. It would be great to get an idea of, I appreciate we're speaking a little bit around what are the potential development areas that businesses can look at for recruitment. But if you paint a picture for us around, okay, what's a process done before we go into any detail about, okay, where are the potential negatives and the failures? Walk us through a hire that's gone well for you and that you've spearheaded, and from first contact all the way up to even the first few months in post, what made it work? How did you embed that person in the business?
Yeah, to be fair, Rich, I think it wouldn't necessarily be one specific hire. If you look across the board at probably what our retention rates are, what we've always measured ourselves in, and this was even going back to internal recruitment. So if the people that you speak to and put forward to an interview, do those people attend? Are they interested in the role and opportunity? Right. If they are interested in the role and opportunity, if they like them at interview, what is the likelihood of them accepting? And then again, from that point, again, starting. So a good kind of process to me is not trying to fit square pegs in round holes. So
100%.
It is really about understanding the person. So in your recruitment process, if you get a CV through, what the probably thing to absolutely not do is just bang an email saying, look at your CV, would you be interested in coming in to see us? You've got absolutely zero engagement with the individual, the candidate. You've given them at that point zero reason to actually come in to see you. So the first part of your process really should be, you've got a great candidate, give them a call, jump on a Teams and really have a good opportunity to introduce yourself to them, introduce the role, the opportunity, the company, why it's a great place to work and why they should kind of come in and come and see you personally. I think at that point, if then you have the bite, we would typically send some information out for the candidate to be able to look over and consider. And if at that point they can come back as interested, you've got that part of buy-in now that they understand what the role is, what's going to be asked of them, what they're going to be looking to do within the role. So actually when you come in, you're already partly aligned. And from that, again, it's trying to make any interview as a two-way process. It's for both parties to find out whether there's a fit there. Mm-hmm. Now, I know you talk quite a lot about skill versus attitude.
Yes. Yeah.
The best way really is, you can obviously see on somebody's CV that there's a likelihood that they've got the skill to be able to do the job, but the rest should then be understanding the attitude and is there a cultural fit for that organisation. So if it's a high-paced, quite cutthroat culture, there's no point making an apology and apologising for it. You're best being open and honest and upfront about what your environment and culture is.
Right.
Because that person's either going to be able to self-select in or out and say this is for me or not. So again, it's giving plenty of opportunities for self-selection or deselection within your recruitment process. So when you get down to the point of offer, then there's a good opportunity to be able to close the deal. The other bit that really scuppers most things is talking about package up front. Loads of people leave package right to the very end, to the point where you've both invested a ruck of time into things. We would always establish what is your minimum that you're looking for to be able to make that move, because there's no point wasting each other's time. If you aren't going to be able to meet my basic needs, then, we have to kind of go separate ways. And I think kind of companies often think, if I can get that person in, if I can meet them, if I can sell them the dream and tell them how great a business is, then I think they'll accept 4K less. And at that point, you make a 4K less offer 90% of the time. It's not well received. And, the candidate loses kind of faith in you in the business. So
I'm with you.
I know I've probably not answered that.
No, absolutely. I think that makes sense.
Is process. Every part of your recruitment process has to be two-way. If you want to do it where you're dictatorial and they should just sell themselves to me, you will never get the best candidates on the market.
So what I'm hearing from you there, as you're sharing it, is that it's like clarity is key. And ultimately, a lot of where the great recruitment starts, as you said at the very beginning there, is like working out, okay, what's the job offer? When does recruitment start? It's way before the role's even advertised. Yeah. It seems that a good outcome is, you've got to get the job advert right. But doing that work early on, that kind of foundational work, it really makes sure that everything else around it as far as the process is you're getting it right and
Yeah.
you're being clear. One of the things that I'm genuinely interested in at this stage of where we're at, just in the UK generally, there's a huge wave of changes that are applying to pretty much all UK businesses over this next 12 months. And we're recording this in June 26. These changes, especially things like, the day one rights for unfair dismissal, which people are throwing out there. Technically, it isn't day one rights. Employers are going to have 6 months to make a decision as to whether or not somebody's suitable in post.
Yeah.
And from January 27, that 6-month rule ultimately means that you're treating people who've been with the business for, say, a few months, 6 months, in the same way that you would somebody that's been with the business for a decade or two. So it's something that isn't really fully, the business community is fully anticipating this. So for me, it's like a lesser known thing that what we're touching on now is that ultimately, if you get the recruitment right, then because of these changes that will be occurring and they're happening, it's proposed to technically happen from July 26 anyway. So from July this year, anybody that's engaging new people that are joining a business, they have to be so careful about it. Once they hit that 6-month anniversary, there's just a wave of additional red tape that business leaders then have to be aware of. And the common misconception is it's not something we need to be worried about yet because it doesn't happen until early 27, when in reality, no, it's happening now. So to get this nailed and to be able to speak to people who understand, okay, what does a good recruitment process look like? In my view, it comes back to that point, and it speaks to that point you shared about the 90% preparation. If you get the prep right, then going through these processes that you're sharing today is so important to the whole, okay, well, how do we know we've got the right person to then limit the opportunity for there to be potential issues? And clarity, communication is such a massive part of that, Steve, isn't it? It's such a huge part of it. If you clarify the role, if you get the expectations right early, then it's a lot less likely that there are going to become problems. And don't get me wrong, there are challenges with any recruitment exercise or when you're engaging people, people are unpredictable. That being said, though, you can add a degree of predictability to the whole process by getting the system right.
There's an argument in there about, as people, we always want the best bang for a buck. And I think sometimes there's a compromise that when it comes to recruitment. I think I was chatting to one of a kind of client the other day, and the kind of way he phrased it in the end is he trusts us or trusts me to tell him what the best person that he can get on the market is for his money. So sometimes, you think from a client's perspective, is there certain people settling because they believe that's the best that there is on the market? And then the challenges that come after settling, because where do you make your concessions? And there's always concessions in a recruitment process, especially if your budget isn't kind of where it needs to be. But again, that's where the expertise about where you need to make the concessions and what concessions can be made and not made are important. Again, the kind of client said to me, ultimately, he knows that I will have scoured the market because we don't operate just on an application. We are a search and headhunt based agency, and that's on every assignment. So actually, it's about being a premium kind of partner. We're going out there and finding you the best available person to your budget. And that's ultimately what you should be looking for. And it's probably like the DIY, just because you recruit, the same as any DIY person, you can put up a picture, you can lay your own floor. But it's about the right tools to do the job. If you're only using one source, which might be a job board or Indeed, what about all the other sources that are available to you and all the other avenues to be able to make sure that you've found the right person in the end? So just because you can doesn't always mean you should.
Exactly. I've certainly come across this before where, like you say, that kind of DIY mindset of, well, we can do it internally. And I come back to this point, similar to what you were sharing earlier around time. It's like, well, how do you value your time? Because if it means that it's taking you away from other aspects of the business that ultimately drive more revenue, then to hand it over to somebody who knows what they're doing, that makes sense for a lot of business leaders, because it's like, okay, I haven't got the opportunity to go into the level of detail that I need to in order to find the best talent or the right person for that role based on the budget.
And it's all context. And if it works for the organisation, they're getting the results that they want, then it's doing what it needs to do. And again, I think it goes back to that attitude versus skill. I think if you've got the time and capacity to support, train, coach and develop, then you can look for lots of transferable skills from different industries to get somebody into the role. It's probably more where there's a required skill, it's a required kind of customer base that somebody's dealt with, or whatever the kind of case may be, where you need them to hit the ground running and start adding value from day one, really.
I'm with you. So as you're sharing that there, like what I'm hearing is, you've got to be really lift up under the hood of the business and understand what's the offer, getting the offer really nailed. So anybody coming in, it's super clear around what the expectations are for that person, salary expectations included. Typically, though, when I'm speaking to business leaders, one of the things that they initially go to is a lot of them will look at measuring cost per hire. Yeah. Would you say that there's other more useful measurements to look at? So like what would you suggest as an alternative? Like what would you recommend that they're measuring instead rather than cost per hire?
Yeah, cost per hire is one measurement really, but it's all relative to return on investment.
Right.
Again, if you're kind of looking at your acquisition cost, now that's if you're going from Indeed or an agent, what's the average tenure of the employee from whichever channel that you're using? What is the timeline that it takes somebody to be up and running and actually be productive within your role? It could be the kind of performance. That there's lots of different things a way to measure, I suppose, in the end. And
yes,
we did an exercise with that when I was working internally. So as an internal recruiter at Phones For You, we'd still have a suite of agencies that we would use. Right. And we would look internally, really, what was the impact of the internal recruitment team? How was our either time to hire, retention, or kind of, quality of candidates? How did that differ to your external suppliers? And ultimately, if you're seeing a high degree of something, you kind of see the output, then you go one way or another, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, yeah. And like you said, there's more than one way of measuring this. Like you say, you can look at it from the perspective of the investment, which, the upside. But I genuinely think that there are a lot of business leaders that don't always look at that for initially. They're perhaps under pressure from a customer satisfaction perspective. They've got to get in people, like you say at the beginning of the podcast, about hitting the ground running, and they've got a certain level of output that needs to be met, in which case they're perhaps going to go through a process a lot quicker. So this kind of leads in. So we've already shared what a good outcome is. So getting the job advert right, what's everything around it you've touched on in terms of the culture aspect of it, and looking at alternatives to cost per hire. That's a thread we were picking up on. But what would you say is the real cost of getting it wrong? And from my side, it's about understanding, okay, what behavior changes are needed within a business to get this bit right, and putting a number on a bad hire for a business that's employing perhaps 30 people. What does it really cost once you add it all up? Have you done any work on this from a recruitment point of view? What's the real cost to a business of getting the recruitment process wrong?
There's loads of numbers out there, and your cost can be upwards of 100 grand in the end, depending on the size of your organisation, your kind of time invested, wages, training costs, recruitment fee. It can obviously depend on level of salary and all the other kind of bits. But if you think quite often, that person might be in post 3 to 6 months, depending on the notice period is. You've got the cost of that individual for that period of time, plus all the training, investment, systems, vehicles, all this stuff. It can be a really, really big number in the end. And I think there's lots of intangible cost in the end. And again, this is a bit I don't think other people really realise. I think, and this is the most important bit, you put somebody into your business that is a detractor or a negative influence, your good employees feel that. And there's a couple of examples of that. We had one business that kept cycling its employees, and my conversation with Tim is like, you're communicating to your team, we've got somebody new coming in, they're going to be starting, and that person at that point in time is thinking, great, the extra workload that I've been picking up, the extra stress, the extra late nights and all the other kind of stuff, or long days that I've been doing to take the strain away from the business, is all going to be eradicated once this new person lands. And then the new person lands and they prove to either be not skilled, don't have the ability to kind of do the role, or they're not going to be up to speed as quickly as a person thinks, or they leave, and you start to go through that cycle again. It demotivates your other employees, and then quite often that can drive that employee to start to look elsewhere. We often have conversations where they go, I just fed up of doing long days, long hours, picking up everybody else's work and not getting any recognition, reward, or kind of even acknowledgement of what I'm doing to try and keep things going, because the business thinks I'll be fine. They're doing great. They just pick it up. But the other bit is, and again, we find this depending on size of teams, the bad manager is probably the biggest challenge that you put in there. You put somebody in, and a great example of that, somebody's came from large corporate business, a contact center, went into a smaller SME. They tried to apply or manage within the same rules as they did within large business, and it actually wiped out 50% of the team, and quite a few of those were the high performing people within the business, because you fundamentally changed the culture, you changed the rules of engagement, and
I'm with you
went from being a really nice, personable place to work to putting just call stats in, call times, call handling time, all that stuff, for it just to totally change the culture overnight. So you have to be really careful about what you put in and how it aligns to your kind of business and goals.
And yeah, coming back to what you were sharing there around, ultimately what I'm hearing is that you've got lost team morale there that's potentially going to happen where you're not getting the recruitment process or the hiring process correct and right for that business. And it's not like a catch-all way of recruitment. There's certain methods and tools that will work more perhaps for more modest businesses than they would be for like your big corporates. And customer trust as well. This is something where if you're in that spot of you're working in that team, inevitably there's a ripple effect as well on the customer side, because customer delivery is impacted. And I genuinely think a lot of business leaders, they don't realize the impact of that with any organization that I come across, certainly within the SME space. Probably the biggest risk from a people ops perspective does sit within that middle management layer, because they're the ones who are ultimately trying to deliver on whatever the senior leadership team, what their vision is. And without having the right skills in the right way, a lot of it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And that's something we see all the time with the service in terms of, okay, is that like a training piece? Do we need some leadership training in place so people understand the ripple effect of what's being shared? Yeah. And it's like you say, it's being able to put together a unique framework based on the industries that you work in. I understand where you and I perhaps are similar as a business is that Logic Resourcing and the HR Doctor work across like manufacturing, professional services. We do a bit in retail as well. Yeah. Having that industry understanding as well is a big part of that too. If you're dealing with somebody who's not perhaps as familiar with that sector, they might not understand some of the nuance that comes with it as well. So when you're hiring, understanding that nuance is quite important to make sure is that candidate the right person to get into the interview in the first place. You shared this is perhaps something relevant to the whole technology side. You shared a story the other week when we spoke about where somebody had gone through like an AI generated recruitment process that completely missed the point around they were asking questions around what HRIS systems they were using.
Yeah, definitely.
And it turned out that part of the whole AI piece was it was never asked. That question was never asked in the first place. So share a bit about that, because I think this illustrates the point really well.
There's loads of it. There's loads of kind of thought process now. And I know you love AI, and I know you love tech and how tech can improve processes. And there's so many opportunities to do that within a recruitment process. However, fundamentally, recruitment is personal. You need to understand the individual, what they're looking to do, achieve, what their career trajectory looks like, to really be able to do your recruitment. And this is where I think AI can be a real challenge. I think, in this example, it was for a HR manager role, and he was asked to do an AI interview. Now, this AI interview looked at how many times he looked away from the camera, it counted how many times his eyes went to the right, it counted all this other kind of stuff in there.
Right.
But he got rejected fundamentally because he didn't have experience in a system, I think it was called HiBob, and actually he's implemented that twice in 2 businesses. But the AI
completely
failed to ask that question. Now, that's whether that wasn't set up in the correct way, but during an interview process, the human generally kind of flexes during the interview, and as the interview conversation flows, you'll get onto the right kind of questions. And I think that's probably the one challenge with AI at the moment, is it's quite literal. I'm guessing you need to program what it is definitely from a job description needs, and then it won't ad lib or do anything in between in the end.
Yeah, I mean, look, I agree. The risks of AI, where I call it like human in the loop. And there's got to be, it's a necessity. I see AI as like a multiplier. It's a tool, and it'll be a tool eventually that everybody can access, and it'll be like electricity. It'll literally be everywhere. But genuinely, with the way it works, there has to be, in my view, that human in the loop piece going on, because without it, like you say, these stories you hear of it's missed something because it's taken it literally, or it's not able to really dig down into what a human would look at in an interview process, or so it's challenging.
I think as well, I think it goes down to the work, and it's funny actually, HR consultant, recruitment consultant, and I was chatting to her accountant. The skill and the ability is to be able to consult in the end, whether that in anything. We're talking to the accountant, an AI bot can now do accounts, it could submit your VAT return. However, it can't really understand what those set of numbers ultimately always do currently. What does it mean? How does it impact me? How does it impact my business? What's the other ripple effects? So, the ability, and again, AI will definitely have its place, but the consult piece is using that as standalone without any skill or experience of where best to use it, how to place it, and when to use your own intuition, knowledge, and stuff as another. There's probably another element to me in the end.
It's important. I genuinely think as well that, as you would with an applicant, the kinder approach is that if it's not a particularly good fit at the moment, is to perhaps take a view that you're not going to use it early, or do you look at keep trying and developing it further? And I think that's something that, in the same way that people look at what their tech stack is within the business, who their suppliers are, who the vendors are, you've got to be doing exactly the same thing with your people too, in my view, because they're the ones who are closest to delivering the product or the service that you're offering.
I think with AI, where it has its value is in high volume, large businesses. I think, say when we were at Phones for You, I think we used to get upwards of 90,000 applications a year. And actually, AI may be able to help you with that first sift. So there'll be kind of use cases probably where in large businesses that get a hell of a lot of interest and working for their organisation, then AI will be a big part. But I suppose if you talk about the kind of more local, regional SMEs, actually a lot more work needs to be done to attract the applicants in the first place before you can even start to use AI to do your first level sifting, in my opinion.
On that, what are you finding are the draws, for more like regional based SMEs that are trying to attract talent? Is it the local piece? Is it that we're trying to bring in people locally, or how do you see that developing?
Yeah, I think the draws really is for an SME to compete. And I've got a great example. And I was recruiting for a BDM for an SME. Right. Now, they were quite clear on what they wanted. They wanted somebody to come from a large national brand. That was would be their sweet spot if we could manage to get them that person, because they were going to help to bring new business to the organisation. Mm-hmm. We managed to get somebody in that conversation. And my first thing was, do not fall in love with this candidate, because a lot has got to happen to be able to pull them from a larger brand that's established with an established customer base, all the other kind of bits that do it. A lot has to happen to be able to get them over the line. But we got them we were at the conversation. So let's see kind of where it goes. Now, ultimately, this person didn't end up joining the business. They got a counter offer, and their kind of reasons and motivations were largely financial. They were being put at a detriment as part of a restructure. But actually, because they were due to move to this other company, the company then decided, didn't realise what the value was of this individual, and they didn't want them to leave for that person to stay. So it's understanding. And again, so I'm going to answer that. There were drivers, though. There's drivers to every person wanting to make that change. And as an SME, you need to understand your drivers. What is it that you can offer to compete? Have you got an amazing work-life balance, a kind of culture that's different to the norm within your industry? Have you got great relationships, customers? Are people joining a stable base? And that is quite important to talk about June 2026, where everything is going up, bills, lots of insecurity, economy is not exactly performing at the highest level. Security then becomes the biggest thing that people are after. And one of the kind of questions a candidate asked one of the directors we're recruiting for the other day is, tell me about the financial security of your business and how it's performing. Because if I'm going to make the change, I don't want to be jumping from the frying pan into the fire. So again, with that, it's really understanding what can you offer? What have you got to bring to the table? to be able to attract the right level of kind of quality of candidate that you want.
Exactly. I really like what I'm hearing there is that it's a leap of faith.
Yeah.
If somebody's looking to move position, then, and from both sides as well, there's an aspect of, there's a leap of faith from the employer's side offering the position, but also from the candidate's perspective as well.
Yeah.
And how do you influence that? Well, it's through clarity, like you say, getting the preparation right early so you can then deal with these kind of objections or questions that occasionally come through on the back of a recruitment exercise. Yeah, I think that's super helpful.
But we all have a responsibility, don't we, Rich, as well? You're taking somebody, my job is to take somebody out of a role that they might be quite comfortable and stable with, to offer them an opportunity that I believe could be a better opportunity for them in another company. And I think you have to take that responsibility as an employer. You have to make sure that you're bringing the person to there for the right reasons, because you're pulling out somebody out of something that they've been there for 5 years. It's going to be unstable, for them, and actually you want to make sure it's the right thing for them so they don't suffer any detriment.
Yeah, it's helpful as well. In the podcast, we try and speak about this on a neutral basis and looking at it from the other aspect as well, from the employer's side. What would you say are some of the early warning signs that a hire is going wrong, and how fast would you recommend somebody act if things are going wrong? Like what do you come across? I'm sure that's something, it's part of the whole people being unpredictable piece.
Yeah.
Occasionally you can get the process, you can get the hiring process right, and the features of the role and the offer and the clarity's there. And occasionally sometimes it doesn't work, and it's understanding that's part of the process too. So there are things that employers can do to mitigate the risk of that happening. Definitely the things you've shared already. Like, what would you suggest is some of the early warning signs that you've got to be mindful of where the hire is going wrong?
Yeah, I think quite often it's engagement. So I know you're a massive advocate of the onboarding piece.
Yes, yeah.
And onboarding on both parts needs to be right, doesn't it? And then from that point, it's what is the level of kind of engagement, the level of commitment? What is the person showing the right early signs? And the right early signs, I think, is largely attitude based. It's hard to assess somebody in the first month of whether they're going to be successful, fully in the role. However, what you would expect them to do is give 100% within that time, 100% commitment, attitude, focus, to have the right personal characteristics. So they're engaging in either their learning, they're engaging with their colleagues, peers. So I would probably say that's the biggest bit that I would assess in the first bit, because if most of that is right, then actually, if you've recruited against skill, they should have the skill to do the job. But ultimately, the biggest bit is actually they're turning up on time, they're doing their buying and their early commitments, which is actually giving the best to make it a success on both sides.
Yeah, they're bedding in well within the team. Like you say, there's some good feedback, they're gelling well within the team. That's always key. And you're building on the engagement, like you say, the engagement piece there. I genuinely think there's lots of things that small business, modest-sized enterprises, SMEs could do more around onboarding. And I get that there's the timing, how much time do you invest in it? But it's one of those things that if you get the onboarding right and there is structure to it, which many, I've dealt with many of our newer customers that come on board where there's literally no structure whatsoever. And, you can see it in the attrition rates as well. I'm a big believer in looking at the data, and the data really does point towards, if you have a solid onboarding process, it limits the opportunity for there to be perhaps a ticking time bomb within the team that perhaps somebody isn't going to be able to achieve what you're asking them to achieve.
And I get why it happens, because people are busy, and then the last thing they want to do is put aside time to be able to develop a 2 to 4 week induction of where somebody needs to be, who they're going to be meeting, what they're going to do, and then the associated tasks to make that happen. However, as an employee, if that amount of investment isn't there up front, you turn up on first day. This is sometimes the feedback that we get. I didn't have any IT equipment available to me. That's quite frustrating. I've got no investment in my onboarding. I've just been told there's my desk, either crack on or sit next to somebody who I don't know who I'm sitting next to and why. Already that individual is not starting to take things seriously, or take it seriously how you feel about that contract, that upfront contract around what you want from them, and vice versa. We had one client, to the other degree, as soon as the person accepted the offer, they were that excited about getting them on board. The 2-week induction was already done, dusted within the next 2 days. And actually, I was able to communicate to the candidate what their first 2 weeks are going to look like and how set up. And that's a serious employer. That's an employer that is setting up for success. That's setting the individual up for success that's coming in. And it's already articulating what they expect of that employee. The unsaid thing is, this is all the stuff that you're going to be doing. You're going to be put through your paces. And it's that bit of, are you up for this kind of thing or not? So there's that other bit as well in what it says about a great induction, will actually help to set your stall out to how you act and behave as an employer.
Absolutely. I mean, that's fantastic in terms of giving people a bit of an insight into what's needed early days. But like, if we just take a couple of steps back and look at, we touched on jobs boards and how the amount of vendors out there now, the market seems to be reducing a bit, where you've got three core people perhaps that are offering jobs boards. One I hear a huge amount for SMEs is the Indeed platform.
Yeah.
And jobs boards have the place. Absolutely. They can have challenges. From a practicality point of view, like, what's useful? What would you say is perhaps a bit slightly maybe even contrarian for business leaders? Where would you say, if Indeed is the default for most employers or business owners that owner-led businesses, where do you see that system lets them down? I'll give you a bit of a starter for 10. I hear a lot around, it can be expensive early to be able to rank in those boards at the top. So they don't necessarily, if they've got a post that they're trying to advertise, it doesn't necessarily go to the applicants that they want it to go to early. Do you hear that? Is that something?
Yeah, cost per acquisition has gone up loads, I think.
Right.
So when Indeed first started, your pay-per-click budget on a job could be, 20, 30, 40 quid or whatever it kind of case may be. And as Indeed now got the monopoly on the job board market, they considerably put up those kind of prices to be wanting to do an average spend of 500 to £1,000 per role. Now, the only thing that does is it promises to drive volume if you're competitive by spending a competitive amount of money and drive your applicants. It doesn't always convert to quality applicants that you want to see. So you could be spending a hell of a lot of money on Indeed to not always get the return that you're expecting at the end of it. Again, it goes back to a holistic approach at looking at that. It's going to cost you money and quite a lot of time. And have you got the time to invest in that recruitment process or cycle? The challenges with Indeed is contact rates. Most people say to us, I'm fed up of calling people, they're no-showing, I can't get hold of them, I can't get them over the line. And the reason for that, Rich, is people could be applying, because a one-click apply, 20 jobs in one sitting. 90% of the time, people go, I can't remember what job it is that I applied for. You're going to have to remind me. They've got multiple applications out with multiple people. And in the recruitment world, this is what we describe as active candidates. So those candidates on Indeed are active and applying for opportunities with anyone else with a similar proposition or opportunity around them. So you're instantly in a competition with other opportunities, and that's why your rates of conversion tend to be quite low from using that platform. Again, it only takes one, and there's an opportunity for them to get that one standout candidate. However, I'll probably say my advice on that is you have to act quite quickly within that, because 9 times out of 10, the person's interviewing somewhere else with somebody else, and if they act quicker, they'll probably win the race.
Right. I mean, I appreciate, again, you're a recruiter. This is coming from a place of positivity. When is it worth bringing in a recruiter? And I know you're going to be honest, even though you are a recruiter. Is there a way of being able for somebody to only perhaps use Indeed if they're on a small budget, or how do they get the most from it? When would you say, in your opinion, is it time to say, I need to speak to somebody in this industry that's going to help me?
They get the most of it, Rich, if they've got a great recruitment process that puts the candidate at the centre of what they do. It's not just seen as an afterthought and an after job at the end of the day.
Right.
I think they get value from it if they really understand their proposition. So actually, 90% of people are just posting the same AI job descriptions out now. So you can tell easily who's just said, create me a job advert, and it gets posted on Indeed. Everyone's advert reads the same, so nobody stands out. And it's the whole AI slop piece that you're seeing on content and media. Same with job adverts. It's just Like I sometimes said I can't really understand what it is that they're after looking for, or what differentiates them from the other person down the road. So getting that spot on, understanding your proposition, understanding why that person needs to come to there, and put that as part of your Indeed content, and then having a great process means that you can hire through the platform. Where really I suppose where you get your value from your recruiter in our situation is if you're looking for support, advice, and trying to get the best person really that you want. So you're not in a panic hire. Ultimately, I want somebody that's going to come in and add me value, and we can deliver your return on investment. If that person kind of comes in and you've taken our advice on what you can get for your budget, that person generally stays, and you get your return quite quickly. So everyone does this. And the biggest thing within the industry, if you hire internally, it's all about cost avoidance. I had a budget when I worked internally at Phones for You that I had a set budget of how much I could spend on agencies per year. But the reality is the business didn't really care, because they wanted the best person. So I used to say to the finance manager, "Wow, this is my budget," and they'd come to me and say, "Can you get the person that we require and come in on the budget?" I'm struggling to attract X, Y, or Z on that for that person. Then the cost to that person not being in the business, the cost to that person not being up and running, either selling, taking workload off, customer delivery issues, that cost is greater than the agency fee in the end. And we had a client who tried to do his own thing, and we reached out and said, "How are you getting on?" And he just was struggling with his day job and to get the person that required. Now, the people that we put in came from his industry, understood it. We put 2 people in there, and they were out and on sites doing site surveys, estimating, doing all the stuff that they should be doing in week 1. And the cost avoidance that you've been doing, trying to get somebody and shoehorn them in, versus actually having somebody that's up and running quickly, is probably negligible in the end. The only other thing to add to that, probably on the back of it, as a business, we offer a 6-month free replacement. So if that person doesn't work out, we replace them free within 6 months. Now, actually, again, if you look at your return on your investment, ultimately, you're probably actually quite secure within that than taking a punt yourself.
Sales-based roles for business development, getting that right early. I genuinely think that there's a lot of people perhaps listening that would not necessarily understand the real costs involved with getting this wrong. The information you shared at the beginning as well about it could lead into the tens of thousands, potentially even hundreds of thousands. For those that are listening, we're currently 2026. The average salary at the moment is around 36k in the UK. Yeah. When you take into account if somebody's on a position, perhaps an entry-level position on a minimum wage salary, when you take into account national minimum wage, national insurance contributions, everything else that's linked to pension contributions, the minimum is around 28k for a full-time worker. So it's a lot of money for a modest-sized enterprise to push forward. If you want to protect that investment, especially the roles that we've been highlighting in today's podcast, that's where it's really important to think, okay, well, have we got the right expertise driving it in the first place? And ultimately, like you say, that's where the investment is, and not seeing it as a cost early on. I think that's the real value of bringing somebody in who knows what they're talking about, as you say, as a consultant. And the big piece I missed for a lot of more modest-sized enterprises is that where you're leaning into a consultant, there isn't the same management implications involved in doing it in-house. So to be able to lean into somebody that can do that ultimately for you without the need for managing it, that's a huge saving in time investment as well.
I think I always remember when I was working internally, what was the secret? Why would agencies get candidates that we didn't? Or how did they outperform sometimes us in certain roles? And the reality is I can spend days sourcing, researching one vacancy, finding out every competitor within a 25-mile radius, then identifying who those people are that I want to speak to. An internal person either working within HR, internal recruitment, quite often doesn't have that time, because you have lots of other pressures that you need to do as an internal recruiter, lots of other commitments to your kind of stakeholders. So there's no real secret sauce. The secret is probably time investment and the tools to do the job.
Right.
We have multitudes of tools apart, as well as our own internal database. So Indeed is one resource. I'd probably say now the least performing channel that we supply people from. The real secret is it's about having the time to be able to find out who it is that you want to go and speak to, and then trying to gain those conversations in the end.
Yeah, and the saving that comes from it in time, monies as well that you're investing. So, yeah, what you were sharing about making sure that once you've found that right person, I think that the next part of what we're going to focus on now is more a bit of a quick fire, a bit of fun. Hire for attitude or skill?
Both.
So it depends.
Yeah.
Oh my days.
And I know that's
We've
not
got
what
a
you're
politician in the mist here, folks.
I know that's not what you're looking for, but
Yeah.
if you need the skill because you've got a gap that you need to immediately plug, then you've got to hire for skill. If you've got time to train, then hire for attitude.
Love it. And look, that it depends. Like you say, it's so contextual, isn't it? That's what it's about. It's about what I think genuinely, like when you're speaking to people who are very outcome focused. Now, I'm incredibly outcome focused. And I get from a choice perspective, but sometimes it does depend, and it depends on the role. It depends on who you're looking to bring on board. If
None
it's
of
a
that
trainee
matters.
post.
If none of that matters, no context, attitude.
Always check references or waste of time.
Waste of time.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's again, references now from a legal perspective, it's very difficult to understand from a reference whether or not somebody is going to be suitable in post. Getting the whole interview process, I'm a big believer in a working interview sometimes can be a fantastic way to understand how they're gelling with the team. And yeah, the references are pretty minimal nowadays.
Yeah, it's just dates of
when
employment.
did they start?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
And the role and very little else on top of that.
Yeah. I think where the CV doesn't matter as much, we talk about a salesperson, you've got to have the natural ability to communicate in a certain way without even seeing a CV. And if actually you don't engage within the early onset of the conversation, then you're not going to be suitable regardless of CV. However, CV is an important context to somebody's background, history, working experience. You often get to see longevity. There's loads that you can tell from somebody who's spent 10 years in a role. You probably get a bit of a gauge in terms of what kind of character they are, what type of things that, and it helps you. It does help you to make informed decisions as part of your decision-making process in the end after an interview.
I'm very much a big believer in you get the data in and then make the choice based on the data. Yeah. So as part of that, it's really helpful to have multiple data points to be able to draw from, not only one version. That person can show up in an interview in a certain way and the CV might paint a slightly different picture. So again, it's for the person who's chairing the interview to be able to really explore those and understand a little bit more context around where the gaps were and what happened, the reasons for leaving, all that kind of super helpful context to get access to before you've even considered offering them a post. I think that's super helpful.
Yeah.
So wrapping up the podcast then, so what would you say 3 things to do this week? If somebody listening to this is thinking they're an owner-led business, what 3 moves can they make this week to hire better? Yeah. What would you say is something they need to perhaps give a bit more thought to and take seriously?
Yeah, I'd probably say understand your business. And I mean from an employee, an EVP point of view, really understanding what you stand for, what your proposition is, what somebody gets, they're part of your organisation and join you. Because once you've got, that's the foundation to any form or any part of your ongoing recruitment or retention plan. I think another thing I'll probably do is understand where your current employees, especially your high performing employees, sit within the market. If they're great at what they do, ensure that they're being paid fairly and consistently as much as the business can afford, because ultimately that kind of prevents that kind of longer term need for somebody to want to leave and helps your retention strategy. Right. And the probably final bit that I think businesses don't always think about too much is there's so many companies that I speak to that there's positions of risk in there. And I don't know if anyone always looks at the person that's the most knowledgeable person in the organisation, the person that holds the kind of keys to all your internal databases, systems, processes. And I've quite often said to the candidates I've interviewed them, what they're going to do when you leave then? And the candidates responded, it's a great point. I don't know. because this person's become such a specialist within their organisation because they've learned every system and process that they become partly indispensable. But businesses don't often plan for that person to either be hit by a bus, God forbid that's not what you want, or for somebody to contact them to pull them out of that organisation. And that quite often then puts the business into a position where it's fight or flight. They have to really go in hard with a retention or counter offer, which sometimes can be accepted and acceptable, or they then start to panic recruit because they're in a desperate need to find this person. And what we quite often find is that one person doesn't exist in the market because they picked up 2 or 3 people's jobs, and then there needs to be compromise in that. So then he's probably looking at if there's any people of risk in your business and then starting to kind of de-risk those positions the best you can.
What would you say is the one mistake you would remove from every business if you could?
Just settling. And that doesn't always happen, but just settle for the person that they think is the best person available to do the job. Ultimately, the person's either you feel going to be good or not. And what you don't want to do is kind of compromise too much or settle too much.
Excellent. No, that's great. Well, Luke, Steve, really appreciate you being on the People Prescription podcast.
Yeah,
if anybody wants to get in touch with Steve, we're going to have his information around his company, Logic Resourcing, where people can find you. We'll put up in the description below as well. And similarly, if you need to connect up with any sort of aspect of what we spoke about around onboarding or looking at that first 6 months of probationary and reviewing, have you essentially set the new startup for the win, connect up with HR Doctor as well. And you can use the HR Doctor app.